They say grief turns wolves into ghosts. But Marin had learned that some ghosts bleed, breathe, and rock crying children to sleep at 3 in the morning while their fathers drown in whiskey and regret. 6 months. That's how long Marin had been the temporary nanny to 4-year-old Cassia Stormcrest, daughter of Alpha King Darian Stormcrest, ruler of the Northern Reach territories. Temporary, because the king made it abundantly clear that no woman would ever replace his dead mate, Luna Seraphine, who had died in childbirth, bringing Cassia into the world. Temporary, because Darian couldn't look at his own daughter without seeing the wife he'd lost, and someone needed to fill that void even if he refused to acknowledge it. Marin understood ghosts. She'd been running from her own for 3 years now, ever since the night her entire pack was slaughtered by rogues in the borderlands. She'd escaped only because she'd been deemed too weak, too omega, too worthless to waste energy, killing. So she'd done what omegas do best. She'd disappeared, changed her name from Marin Ashwood to Marin Grey, dyed her distinctive silver blonde hair to mousy brown, and learned to make herself invisible in a world that had already decided she didn't matter. The Ironwood Palace was the perfect hiding place, a fortress of black stone and perpetual winter, where servants were numerous enough to be faceless, and the king too consumed by grief to notice one more broken soul among his staff. She'd applied for the scullery position, content to scrub pots and fade into obscurity. But then the head housekeeper, Mrs. Thornwell, had grabbed her arm one desperate evening. "You're young and the child likes you. The king is in one of his moods, and the last nanny just quit. Can you handle a 4-year-old for one night?" 1 night became 1 week. 1 week became 1 month. And now, 6 months later, Marin was the longest-lasting nanny Cassia had ever had. 19 nannies in 4 years, each one fleeing after encountering either the king's cold indifference or Cassia's heartbreaking questions about why her papa wouldn't play with her anymore. Marin stood in the nursery now, watching dawn break over the frost-covered mountains through windows that never seemed to let in enough light. Cassia slept peacefully in her canopied bed, dark curls spilling across her pillow, one small hand clutching the worn stuffed wolf that had belonged to her mother. The room was filled with expensive toys that no one played with, beautiful dresses that no one saw, books that no one read aloud, except Marin. She began the morning routine with practiced efficiency, lighting the fire, preparing Cassia's clothes, checking that breakfast would arrive on time. Every movement was designed to be unremarkable, forgettable, because if she became too important, someone might look closer, might notice that her wolf scent wasn't quite right for an omega, might question why she flinched at the mention of the borderlands, might discover that Marin Grey didn't exist before 3 years ago. "Marin?" Cassia's sleepy voice came from the bed. "Is Papa coming to breakfast today?" The same question every morning, the same hope in those golden eyes, so like her father's. "I don't know, little star," Marin said gently, using her nickname for the child, "but I'll be there." Cassia smiled, and for a moment, the perpetual sadness that haunted Ironwood Palace seemed to lift. Just a moment. Just enough to make Marin forget she was supposed to stay invisible. Just enough to make her forget that temporary was supposed to mean temporary. 3 years ago, the Ashwood pack had been small but prosperous, nestled in a valley where the borderlands met the southern forests. Marin had been the youngest of 3 daughters, an omega in a family of betas, always slightly out of place, but loved nonetheless. Her father had been a craftsman, her mother a healer. They'd lived simply, peacefully, convinced that their isolation protected them from the politics and violence of the larger packs. They'd been wrong. The rogues came on a new moon, when the darkness was absolute and the pack's warriors were scattered on a hunting expedition. 50 rogues against 20 wolves, mostly women, children, and elders. It hadn't been a battle, it had been a massacre. Marin still dreamed about it sometimes. The way fire turned night into day. The screaming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Her mother pushing her toward the root cellar, whispering desperate instructions. "Hide. Don't shift. Don't make a sound. Survive." She'd hidden in that cellar for 2 days, listening to her world die above her. When she'd finally emerged, there was nothing left but ash and bodies. The rogues had taken everything of value and burned the rest, leaving a message written in blood across her father's workshop. Weak packs deserve extinction. The territorial alphas who arrived days later had confirmed what Marin already knew. Her pack's lands would be absorbed, their name erased from the records, their deaths marked as unfortunate but inevitable, given their lack of proper defenses. No one cared about a small omega pack in the borderlands. No one except the vultures who picked through the ruins looking for salvage. Marin had fled before they could decide what to do with the sole survivor. She'd walked for weeks, stealing clothes from washing lines, eating scraps, avoiding roads and towns where questions might be asked. Her Omega status made her beneath notice to most wolves. A survival advantage she'd never appreciated until it kept her alive. But she'd made one critical mistake during those desperate weeks. She'd shifted in front of a merchant caravan when a mountain cat attacked. She'd defended them without thinking, and in doing so, revealed that she wasn't quite the weak Omega she appeared to be. Her wolf form was larger than it should be, stronger, with unusual silver markings that suggested beta or even alpha bloodlines somewhere in her ancestry. The merchant had been kind enough not to report her to the nearest pack authorities, but his advice had been clear. Hide what you are, girl. Wolves like you, caught between classifications, make alphas nervous. They'll either try to control you or eliminate you. Better to be overlooked than to be noticed. So she'd learned to suppress her wolf, to present as the smallest, meekest version of herself. She'd dyed her hair, changed her name, and sought work in places where servants were invisible. The Ironwood Palace had been perfect, a place of such profound grief that no one looked too closely at anyone, where the king himself was too broken to notice the wolves around him. For 3 years, this strategy had worked. She'd been safe, anonymous, surviving if not exactly living. Then Cassia had wrapped her small arms around Marin's neck one evening and whispered, "I wish you could stay forever." And something in Marin's carefully constructed walls had cracked. She'd started reading the girl bedtime stories with voices and enthusiasm instead of monotone efficiency. Started braiding her hair in elaborate styles instead of simple plaits. Started caring when she should have remained detached. Started forgetting that attachments were dangerous. That being noticed meant being vulnerable. That temporary meant she could leave before anyone discovered what she was really hiding. Not just a false identity, but a wolf that didn't fit into any proper category, making her either a treasure or a threat depending on who looked closely enough. The morning Cassia first reached for her hand in public, Marin should have pulled away, should have maintained professional distance, should have remembered the merchant's warning. But the child's hand was so small, so trusting, and Marin was so very tired of being alone. The announcement came during breakfast preparations, spreading through the palace like wildfire. King Darian was returning from the northern campaign 2 weeks early. Marin's hands stilled over Cassia's breakfast tray. A cold finger of dread tracing down her spine. In 6 months, she'd managed to avoid the king almost entirely. He left on campaigns, locked himself in his study during the brief periods he was home, and never, ever came to the nursery wing. Their paths had crossed perhaps 3 times, and each time she'd kept her eyes down, her scent neutral, her presence forgettable. It had been essential to her survival that he not notice her, because Alpha King Darian Stormcrest was legendary for 2 things: his ability to detect lies from 100 paces, and his absolute, consuming hatred of deception in any form. His own beta had been executed years ago for hiding a minor alliance from him. The king valued truth above all else, even when it destroyed him. A wolf hiding her entire identity couldn't afford his attention. "Mrs. Thornwell wants all staff in the Great Hall for inspection," another servant whispered, rushing past the nursery. "The king demands to meet everyone who's been hired in his absence." Everyone. Marin's carefully maintained composure cracked. She'd been hired 6 months ago. She would have to stand before him. Let him see her face. Possibly speak to her. The thought made her wolf whimper with an instinct that went beyond fear into primal warning. "This alpha will see what you are." "Marin? What's wrong?" Cassia had climbed out of bed, her small face creased with concern. "You smell scared." Children were always too perceptive. "I'm fine, little star. Just surprised about your papa coming home early." She forced a smile, braiding Cassia's dark hair with fingers that trembled slightly. "You must be excited to see him." Cassia's expression dimmed. "Papa doesn't see me. He looks at me, but he doesn't see me." The observation was too mature, too heartbreaking for a 4-year-old. "But maybe this time will be different. Maybe if you're there, he'll stay." The innocent hope in those words made Marin's chest ache. She'd learned to read the king's patterns over 6 months of careful observation. He returned from campaigns physically present but emotionally absent, spending exactly 1 hour with Cassia, before retreating to his study, or leaving again on another mission. The child waited each time for a father who couldn't bear to fully return. Maybe, Marin lied gently, hating herself for it. The morning passed too quickly. Marin dressed Cassia in her finest gown, a deep blue that matched her late mother's eyes, and tried not to think about the inspection. Perhaps she could hide in the back of the crowd. Perhaps the king would be too preoccupied to notice one mousy nanny among dozens of servants. Perhaps she was lying to herself. By midday, the palace was transformed. Servants who normally moved with efficient calm now scurried with nervous energy, polishing already clean silver, straightening already straight portraits. The king's reputation for exacting standards made everyone anxious, but Marin suspected something else, drove the tension. Hope. Hope that this return might be different, that the ghost who'd been haunting his own palace for 4 years might finally wake up. When the horn sounded, announcing the king's arrival, Marin felt it before she heard it, a presence like pressure before a storm, making every wolf in the palace pause and turn toward the gates. Power, raw and barely contained, approaching like a force of nature. She clutched Cassia's hand tighter, telling herself it was to comfort the child. Telling herself the trembling in her fingers was cold, not fear. Telling herself that she could survive one more encounter with the king who saw through lies. As long as she stayed invisible, stayed silent, stayed safe. The doors to Ironwood Palace opened, and winter wind swept through the halls, carrying with it the scent of snow, blood, and something else. Something that made Marin's carefully suppressed wolf stir for the first time in 3 years, whispering a single word that terrified her more than any rogue attack. Mate. The great hall could hold 300 people comfortably. Today, it felt suffocating with barely 100. Marin stood near the back with the other household staff, Cassia's hand clasped firmly in hers, despite Mrs. Thornwell's disapproving glare. Protocol dictated the child should stand with her governess at the front, but Cassia had refused to let go of Marin's hand, and no one had the heart to force her. King Darien Stormcrest entered like winter-made flesh. He was taller than Marin remembered, easily 6.5 feet of lethal grace wrapped in black leather and battle-worn steel. His hair was dark auburn, tied back to reveal a face that artists would call beautiful if it weren't so utterly cold. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched and find it wanting. But it was the power rolling off him that made every wolf in the room instinctively bow their heads. Not an alpha command, just pure dominance. The kind of strength that reminded lesser wolves why alphas ruled and omegas served. Marin kept her head down, her breathing carefully controlled, her wolf forcibly suppressed. She would not react, would not acknowledge the impossible pull she felt toward him. Mate bonds were supposed to be rare, sacred, undeniable. They were also completely irrelevant when one half of the bond was a broken king and the other half was a wolf built entirely of lies. Report. Darien's voice cut through the hall like a blade, deep, commanding, and utterly devoid of warmth. His beta, Commander Rowan, stepped forward. The northern campaign was successful, Your Majesty. The rogue factions have been eliminated. Casualties were minimal. He paused. And in your absence, the palace has remained secure. No incidents to report. Staff changes? 12 new hires in the past 6 months. All properly vetted. Rowan gestured to a line of nervous servants. They await your inspection. Marin's heart hammered against her ribs as Darien began walking down the line, his scrutiny absolute. He spent mere seconds with each servant, asking clipped questions about their background, their duties, their loyalty. Some he dismissed with a nod. Others he paused before, his nostrils flaring slightly as if scenting something off, though he never called anyone out directly. He was 3 servants away when Cassia suddenly pulled free of Marin's grip. Papa! The child ran across the great hall, her small voice echoing off stone walls. Every head turned. Darien stopped mid-question, his expression transforming from cold calculation to something worse, carefully blank detachment. Cassia reached him and wrapped her arms around his legs, and for one heartbreaking moment, the king didn't move. Didn't reach down. Didn't acknowledge his daughter's embrace beyond a slight stiffening of his shoulders. Cassia. His voice was gentler, but no warmer. You should be with your governess. But I missed you, Papa. Did you bring me a present? Did you fight bad wolves? Marin says you're the strongest alpha in all the territories. Who is Marin? The question silenced the hall. Cassia turned, pointing directly at Marin with the innocent confidence of a child who didn't understand she'd just painted a target on someone's back. My nanny, she's the best. She reads me stories and braids my hair, and she doesn't leave like the others do. Darian's whiskey eyes followed his daughter's gesture, landing on Marin with the weight of an avalanche. Their gazes locked, and the world contracted to that single point of contact. The mate bond, which Marin had been desperately ignoring, roared to life like a wildfire. She felt it in her bones, her blood, her soul. This impossible recognition that this wolf was hers, and she was his, ordained by forces beyond choice or reason. His eyes widened fractionally. His nostrils flared, and Marin watched in horror as recognition flashed across his face, followed immediately by something that looked like rage. Come here. Not an alpha command, but it might as well have been. Marin's feet moved before her mind could protest, carrying her across the hall to stand before the king and his daughter. Up close, he was overwhelming. Power, presence, and pain, so deep it radiated off him in waves. She could smell his scent now, pine, steel, and winter storms. It called to everything she was trying to hide. Name, he demanded. Marin Grey, Your Majesty. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You're Cassia's nanny. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. How long? 6 months, Your Majesty. And in those 6 months, did anyone think to inform me that my daughter had formed an attachment to her 19th nanny? His gaze cut to Mrs. Thornwell, who paled. Your Majesty, you left instructions not to be disturbed with household matters unless absolutely. My daughter is not a household matter. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees, then back to Marin. Look at me. She'd been staring at his chest, avoiding direct eye contact. Now she had no choice. Their eyes met fully, and she watched his pupils dilate, watched him struggle to control his reaction to the bond. He felt it too. Of course he did. Mate bonds weren't one-sided. Impossible, he breathed, then louder. Who sent you? The accusation hit like a physical blow. No one, Your Majesty. I applied for a scullery position 6 months ago. A scullery position. His laugh was bitter. And somehow you ended up caring for my daughter. Convenient. Papa, you're being mean. Cassia tugged on his coat. Marin is nice. She makes me happy. Something cracked in Darian's expression, a flash of raw pain before the cold mask slammed back into place. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Marin watched him see what she saw every day. A lonely child desperate for attention, growing up in a palace that felt more like a mausoleum. You will report to my study tonight, he told Marin, his voice carefully controlled. After Cassia is asleep, we have much to discuss. It was a dismissal and a summons and a threat all at once. As he turned away, still not embracing his daughter, Marin caught his whispered words to Commander Rowan. Background check. Complete and thorough. I want to know everything about Marin Grey down to the color of her first blanket. By sunset. Her false identity wouldn't survive that level of scrutiny. By tonight, he would know Marin Grey didn't exist. And then, he would demand to know why. The ghost she'd been running from for 3 years was about to meet the wolf who could see through lies. One of them wouldn't survive the encounter. The afternoon stretched like torture. Marin went through the motions of caring for Cassia, while her mind raced through impossible scenarios. She could run, pack a bag, slip out through the servants' entrance, disappear into the wilderness before sunset. But running meant abandoning Cassia, and the thought made her chest physically ache. When had she become so attached? When had temporary become essential? You're quiet today, Cassia observed, looking up from the storybook they were reading. Did Papa scare you? Your Papa is intense. Marin managed a weak smile. But he's not scary. He loves you very much, little star. Then why doesn't he ever hug me? The question was simple, devastating. Marin, did I do something bad? Is that why Mama died when I was born? Is that why Papa can't look at me? Oh, sweetheart, no. Marin pulled the child into her arms, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. None of this is your fault. Your Papa is very sad, and sometimes when grown-ups are sad, they forget how to show love. But it doesn't mean they don't feel it. She was lying. She could smell Darian's emotional devastation every time he was near his daughter, not absence of love, but overwhelming presence of it mixed with grief, so profound it had turned into rejection. He loved Cassia desperately. He just couldn't separate that love from the loss of his mate. A knock at the nursery door made them both jump. Commander Rowan entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Gray. The king requests your presence in the South Tower study." "Immediately." "Immediately." Not sunset. He'd finished his investigation early. "But Cassia..." "I'll stay with the child." Mrs. Thornwell appeared behind Rowan, her face sympathetic. Whatever they'd discovered, even she pitied Marin now. "Go on, dear. Best not to keep His Majesty waiting." Marin kissed Cassia's forehead, breathing in the child's innocent scent one last time. "Be good, little star. I'll see you soon." Another lie. She was getting so tired of lies. The walk to the South Tower felt like a funeral march. Servants she passed quickly looked away, confirming that rumors had already spread. The king had discovered something about the nanny. The king was furious. The king was about to make an example of someone who dared deceive him. Commander Rowan stopped outside a heavy oak door. "A word of advice, Miss Gray." His voice dropped low. "His Majesty values truth above all else. Whatever you're hiding, confession might save your life. Continued deception will not." Then he opened the door and gestured her inside. The study was all dark wood and darker shadows, lit by a massive fireplace that cast dancing light across walls, lined with books and weapons in equal measure. King Darian stood at the window, his back to the door, his posture radiating controlled fury. "Close the door." Marin obeyed with shaking hands. The click of the latch sounded like a cell door closing. "Marin Gray," he said without turning. "Age 23, no family, no pack. Affiliation. Applied to Ironwood Palace 6 months ago seeking work in the scullery. Promoted to nanny after the previous one quit. Exemplary service record. Never causes trouble. Keeps to herself." He finally turned, and his eyes were molten gold. His wolf was very close to the surface. "She sounds perfect, except for one small problem." He crossed the room in 3 strides, moving with predatory grace, until he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that the mate bond screamed at her to touch him, to close the distance, to submit to what fate had decided. "Marin Gray doesn't exist." The words hung in the air like an execution sentence. "There are no records of your birth. No records of your family. No records of the southern villages you claim to be from. It's as if you materialized out of nothing 3 years ago." His voice dropped dangerously low. "So I'll ask you once, and I suggest you answer truthfully. Who are you really, and who sent you to infiltrate my palace?" "No one sent me." "Don't." The command made her wolf whimper. "Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I can smell deception on you like perfume. You're hiding something, Omega, and I will know what it is." Omega. He thought she was just an Omega with a false identity, not understanding that the identity was the least of her secrets. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she tried. "I just needed work, needed to disappear." "Disappear from what?" He leaned closer, and she caught his full scent. "Mate, Alpha, hers. What are you running from? Because the only wolves who create false identities this thorough are either criminals or traitors." "I'm neither of those things." "Then what are you?" The question trapped her. To tell the truth meant revealing what she was. A wolf who didn't fit proper classifications, who'd survived a massacre, who was technically without a pack and therefore subject to any alpha's authority. In this region, that meant subject to Darian's authority. He could claim her, bind her, use her however he saw fit, or he could reject the mate bond and execute her for deception. Kings had done worse for lesser betrayals. "I'm a survivor," she finally whispered. "That's all. Just someone trying to survive." "By hiding in my palace? By getting close to my daughter?" His hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. The contact sent electricity through them both, the mate bond singing with satisfaction, even as they both fought it. "Do you have any idea what I've lost? What I've sacrificed? The last person who deceived me cost me everything. I know about your mate." "You know nothing." The words exploded out of him, all his careful control shattering. Seraphine was everything. She was light and laughter, and every good thing in this cursed world. And she died because I failed to protect her from a threat I didn't see coming. a threat that hid behind friendly smiles and loyal oaths until it was too late. He released her abruptly, stepping back like her touch burned him. So you'll forgive me for being somewhat skeptical when another stranger with a false identity appears in my home, gets close to my daughter, and triggers a mate bond that's supposed to be impossible because I already had mine. Mate bond. He'd said it out loud, acknowledging what they both felt. I didn't plan this, Maren said desperately. I didn't ask for the bond. I didn't seek out Cassia. I just needed work, needed to hide. Hide from what? He was relentless. Give me something, Maren, or whoever you are. Give me one truth I can verify. She stared at him, this broken king who'd lost everything and learned to trust nothing. Behind his cold fury, she could see the pain, raw, bleeding, never healing. He'd loved completely once. It had destroyed him. Now he existed in a state of protective numbness, pushing away even his own daughter to avoid feeling that depth of loss again. And fate, in its cosmic cruelty, had decided to offer him another mate, as if he could survive losing someone again, as if she could survive being close to someone who saw through every defense she'd built. The Ashwood Pack, she heard herself say. 3 years ago, the massacre in the borderlands. I was there. His expression shifted fractionally. The Ashwood Pack was destroyed. No survivors. One survivor. Her voice cracked. Me. I hid in a root cellar while rogues killed everyone I loved. And when I came out, I learned that no one cared. Small Omega packs in the borderlands don't matter to territorial alphas. We were erased from records, our lands absorbed, our deaths marked as inevitable. Truth. Finally. And it felt like bleeding out. Darian studied her with new intensity. Why hide it? Survivors are usually granted sanctuary. I'm not a normal Omega. The confession came easier now, unstoppable. My wolf is too strong, my classification too unclear. Wolves like me make alphas nervous. We're either controlled or eliminated. So I hid what I was, changed my name, and tried to disappear. And my palace seemed like a good hiding place. Your palace seemed like a place where everyone was too busy grieving to notice one more ghost. She met his eyes, directly. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, but I never meant to hurt anyone, especially not Cassia. The name seemed to drain some of his anger. My daughter has become attached to you. And I to her. She's... Maren struggled for words. She's lonely, Your Majesty. She needs someone who sees her, not just as a reminder of loss, but as herself. Don't presume to tell me what my daughter needs. Someone has to. The words escaped before wisdom could stop them, because right now, she's growing up in a palace full of people who are too afraid of your grief to tell you that you're losing her. Not to death, but to neglect. The silence that followed was deafening. Darian's expression cycled through, emotions too quickly to track, rage, pain, denial, and finally something that might have been recognition. Get out, he said quietly. Your Majesty. Get out. Louder now, but somehow more broken. Return to your duties. We'll discuss your situation later. Maren fled before he could change his mind, her heart hammering, her wolf howling with distress at leaving their mate in pain. She'd told him truth, and it had cut them both open. Behind her, through the thick oak door, she heard the sound of something heavy hitting a wall, followed by a roar of pure anguish that shook dust from the rafters. The Ghost King was waking up, and Maren had no idea if that was salvation or doom. 3 days passed in tense silence. Darian didn't summon her again, didn't appear in the nursery wing. According to servant gossip, he'd locked himself in his study, seeing no one except Commander Rowan. Some said they heard him raging. Others claimed they heard him weeping. Everyone agreed the king was unraveling. Maren focused on Cassia, who seemed to sense the tension, but couldn't understand its source. The child asked repeatedly when she could see her papa, each question a small knife to Maren's heart. Soon, little star, she lied. He's very busy. On the 4th day, everything changed. Maren was in the palace gardens with Cassia, watching the child chase butterflies through snow-dusted flower beds, when she felt it, a presence that made her wolf instantly alert. Multiple presences, actually, approaching with the confidence of those who had authority. She turned to find Commander Rowan striding toward her, flanked by palace guards. His expression was grimly apologetic. "Miss Grey, you're to come with us." Her blood turned to ice. "What's happened?" "The Council of Territorial Alphas has convened an emergency session. You've been summoned to testify." The Council, the governing body of all Northern Territories, composed of the 7 most powerful alphas. They were the only authority higher than a king, capable of passing judgment on anyone, including royalty. "Testify about what?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "Your identity. Your presence in the palace. And..." He glanced at Cassia, lowering his voice. "The mate bond with His Majesty." No. No. If the council knew about the bond, that meant Darian had told them. But why? To what purpose? "Marin?" Cassia's small hand slipped into hers. "Where are you going?" "I'll be back soon, sweetheart. Stay with Mrs. Thornwell." "No." The child's grip tightened. "Everyone always leaves. You promised you wouldn't leave like the others." The pain in those words shattered something in Marin's chest. She knelt down, cupping Cassia's tear-stained face. "I'm not leaving you, little star. I swear it. But I have to go talk to some important people. Can you be brave for me?" "I want Papa." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Mrs. Thornwell gently pulled Cassia away as Marin was led through the palace corridors toward the Grand Council chamber. Her mind raced. Had Darian decided she was too dangerous to keep close? Was he using the council to eliminate the problem she represented? Or was he trying to protect her? The thought seemed ridiculous. But the mate bond whispered possibilities she didn't dare believe. The council chamber was a vast circular room with 7 throne-like seats arranged in a semicircle. 6 were currently occupied by territorial alphas, whose combined power made the air thick and difficult to breathe. The 7th Darian seat stood empty. In the center of the room, surrounded by guards, stood a woman Marin had never seen before. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair and ice-blue eyes that held cruel intelligence. When those eyes landed on Marin, they gleamed with satisfaction. "Ah, the little Omega who thinks she can steal a king." "Counselor Ravenna," Commander Rowan said tightly. "Miss Grey is here as summoned. She has not been accused. Yet." Ravenna smiled like a predator. "But the day is young." The massive doors opened again, and Darian entered. He wore full royal regalia, black and silver that emphasized his authority, a crown of twisted iron that seemed to absorb light. But it was his expression that made Marin's breath catch, not cold, not detached, but burning with barely controlled fury. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, as he took his seat among the council. "This session is now convened," announced Alpha Mordecai, the eldest council member. "We are here to address a matter of grave concern, the possibility that King Darian Stormcrest has been compromised by an unknown wolf with false credentials and suspicious timing." Compromised. They thought she was manipulating him through the mate bond. "Counselor Ravenna has brought evidence," Mordecai continued, "suggesting that the female known as Marin Grey may be a plant from rival territories, sent to seduce our king and gain access to strategic information." "That's insane," Marin burst out before wisdom could stop her. "I'm not a spy." "Silence." Ravenna's command cracked through the room. "You'll speak when addressed, Omega." She turned to the council. "Gentlemen, consider the facts. This female appears 3 years ago with no verifiable history. She infiltrates Ironwood Palace under false pretenses. She gains access to the king's daughter and forms a convenient mate bond with a king who desperately needs an heir. It's the perfect strategy." "An heir?" Darian's voice was dangerously soft. "Explain." "Your Majesty, you are without a male heir. The kingdom grows restless. Under territorial law, if you die without producing a son, your throne passes to the council for redistribution." Ravenna's smile sharpened. "But if you take a new mate, produce an heir, these concerns vanish. How convenient that a mate bond suddenly appears, offering you everything you need." The implication hung in the air. Marin was a plant sent to trap him into a politically motivated mating. "I never approached him," Marin protested. "I avoided him for 6 months." "Did you?" Ravenna pulled out a document. I have testimony from palace servants claiming you deliberately placed yourself in the king's path, that you encouraged his daughter to speak of you constantly, that you wore specific scents known to attract alpha wolves. All lies, but twisted just enough to sound plausible. Marin could see doubt creeping into some council members' expressions. This is absurd, Commander Rowan interjected. Miss Grey has served honorably. Has she? Ravenna produced another document. Because I also have evidence that Marin Grey visited the borderlands 6 weeks ago. The same borderlands where rogue activity has increased. The same borderlands where someone has been sharing information about patrol routes and guard rotations. The accusation hit like a physical blow. I've never been to the borderlands since my pack died. I haven't left the palace grounds in 6 months. Can anyone verify that? Ravenna's eyes gleamed. Can anyone account for your whereabouts every single day? Silence. Palace staff came and went. No one tracked nanny schedules that closely. The evidence is circumstantial, Alpha Mordecai said slowly, but troubling. Your Majesty, what say you? All eyes turned to Darian. He'd been silent throughout, his expression unreadable. Now he rose, and the temperature in the room dropped. I say, he began, then paused, his golden eyes finally meeting Marin's. In that moment, she saw everything. His doubt, his fear, his desperate wish to believe her warring with his terror of being deceived again. I say that Counselor Ravenna has brought serious accusations that must be investigated fully. Marin's heart plummeted. However, he stepped down from his seat, walking toward her with deliberate steps. The council murmured. This wasn't protocol. However, he continued, I also say that anyone who claims Marin Grey is a seductress has never met her. She's spent 6 months avoiding me, not pursuing me. She's formed no alliances, gathered no information, and shown no interest in politics or power. The only thing she's done is care for my daughter with a devotion that puts this entire court to shame. He stopped directly before her, and Marin felt the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. You want to know if she's compromised me, Counselor? His voice carried through the chamber. Then know this. The compromise happened the moment I saw her with Cassia, reading stories and braiding hair, and doing all the things a child needs that I've been too broken to provide. The compromise happened when I realized someone else was giving my daughter the love I've been too afraid to show. He turned to face the council, and his next words rang with absolute authority. Marin Grey is under my protection. Any who move against her move against me. She will not be investigated like a criminal. She will not be treated as a suspect. And if anyone has a problem with that. His alpha power flooded the room, making every wolf present drop their eyes in submission. They can challenge me directly. The silence was absolute. Ravenna recovered first, her expression twisting with frustration. Your Majesty, the council has the right. The council has the right to advise, not to dictate. Darian's tone could freeze blood. This session is over. Miss Grey will return to her duties. And if I find evidence that anyone has fabricated charges against her, his eyes locked on Ravenna, we'll have a different kind of trial. He turned back to Marin, offering his hand. Come, my daughter is waiting. Marin stared at that outstretched hand, trembling. He'd just declared her under his protection before the 7 most powerful alphas in the territories. Had just risked political stability to defend her. Had just chosen to believe her when every instinct probably screamed that trust was dangerous. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the mate bond flared so brightly that several council members gasped. There was no hiding it now. No denying what fate had decided. As Darian led her from the chamber, Marin heard Ravenna's parting whisper, this isn't over. But for now, walking beside the king who'd claimed her before the council, Marin allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe temporary could become permanent. Maybe ghosts could learn to live again. Darian didn't speak as he led her through the palace corridors, his hands still clasped around hers with a grip that felt both protective and desperate. Servants scattered at their approach, eyes wide at the sight of their king touching someone voluntarily for the first time in 4 years. They didn't go to his study or the nursery. Instead, he brought her to a wing of the palace she'd never entered, the royal private quarters. The guards at the entrance looked shocked, but said nothing, as their king passed with a strange woman in tow. He opened a door to reveal a sitting room that was both magnificent and heartbreaking. This had clearly been Luna Seraphine's space, all soft fabrics and warm colors, frozen in time like a shrine. Darian stopped in the center of the room, finally releasing her hand. "I need the truth," he said without preamble. "All of it, not the careful half-truths you gave me before, everything." Marin looked around the room, feeling like an intruder in a dead woman's sanctuary. "Why here?" "Because this is where Seraphine and I used to talk, where she'd make me tell her things I didn't want to admit." His voice softened with memory. "She always knew when I was hiding something, said I had to tell my left hand would tense just before I lied." He held up his left hand. It was trembling slightly. "I'm about to break every promise I made at her grave," he continued. "I swore I'd never trust again, never open myself to loss, never let anyone close enough to destroy me the way her death did." He finally looked directly at Marin. "But the mate bond won't be ignored, and my wolf won't stop demanding. I claim you, protect you, keep you." "I never asked for the bond," Marin whispered. "Neither did I. But we have it, and before I decide what that means, I need to know who you really are." Not Marin Gray. Not the survivor of Ashwood Pack, but the wolf standing in front of me wearing fear like armor. Something about his honesty, his vulnerability in this room full of ghosts, made Marin's own walls crack. If he could be brave enough to risk trust again, maybe she could be brave enough to be fully seen. "My birth name was Marin Ashwood," she began. And then the whole story poured out. Her childhood in the small pack, the massacre that orphaned her, the weeks of desperate wandering, the moment she'd shifted in front of witnesses and revealed she wasn't quite Omega, not quite Beta, something in between that made her dangerous to those who needed wolves to fit into neat categories. "I'm what the old wolves called a drift," she explained. "Neither fully one classification nor another. In ancient times, we were considered blessed, capable of mediating between different wolf types. But modern packs see us as threats to hierarchy. Alphas especially hate us because we're harder to dominate, harder to control." Darian was listening with absolute focus. "How strong is your wolf?" "Strong enough that I could defend myself against most betas, not strong enough to challenge an alpha." She hesitated. "But strong enough that some alphas might want to claim me just to ensure I don't become someone else's asset." "Is that why you hid?" "Partly, but also..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I was tired. Tired of being hunted. Tired of being alone. The palace seemed like a place where I could finally rest, where no one would look too closely at one more broken soul. And then Cassia happened. Marin agreed softly. "I tried to stay detached. Tried to remember I was temporary. But she's so much like you, you know. Lonely and trying so hard to be brave about it, pretending she doesn't need love while desperately hoping someone will offer it anyway." Darian flinched. "I can't look at her without seeing Seraphine dying. Every time Cassia smiles, it's her mother's smile. Every time she laughs, it's the sound I'll never hear from my mate again." "So you push her away?" "So I keep her safe." His voice turned fierce. "If I don't love her, I can't lose her. If I don't attach, I can't be destroyed again." "But you are attached," Marin said gently. "And you are being destroyed. Just slowly, by your own hand instead of fate's." He turned away, shoulders rigid with tension. "You don't understand what it's like. Seraphine and I were true mates, the kind that poets write about. We completed each other in ways Eilon didn't know were possible. And then she died, bringing our daughter into the world. And I..." His voice broke. "I felt her die through our bond. Marin. Felt her slip away while I was powerless to stop it. It was like having my soul torn out while I was still alive." Marin moved closer, drawn by his pain. "I do understand. I felt my entire pack die. Maybe not through a mate bond, but through pack bonds that were just as real. I know what it's like to survive something that should have killed you." "Then you know why I can't do this again." He gestured between them. "The mate bond is offering me a second chance, and all I can think is that it's another opportunity for the universe to destroy me. If I claim you, if I let myself feel again, how long until fate decides to take you too? You don't know that will happen. I don't know it won't." He turned back, and his eyes were molten with unshed tears. "And even if you survive, even if we build something real, There's still Seraphine's ghost between us. How do I honor what she and I had while accepting what you and I could have? How do I explain to her memory that I'm replacing her? You're not replacing her. Marin took another step closer. Darian, Seraphine is part of you. She always will be. But she's gone, and you're still here, and so is your daughter who needs you. Hiding from life to honor her death isn't loyalty. It's just another kind of dying. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's terrifying. Trusting again after being broken is the bravest thing anyone can do. She was close enough now to touch him. But I see you, Darian. Not the king. Not the alpha. The father who loves his daughter so much it hurts. The mate who grieves so deeply he's forgotten how to live. The wolf who's so afraid of losing again that he's lost himself. His hand came up, fingers trembling as they traced the line of her jaw. And I see you, Marin Ashwood, the drift who survived a massacre and learned to hide in plain sight, the Omega who's stronger than she pretends. The woman who gave my daughter something I've been too broken to provide. The mate bond between them intensified, pulling them together with magnetic force. I'm not ready, he whispered. I'm not ready to let go of my grief. Not ready to risk my heart again. Not ready to be the mate you deserve. I'm not ready either, she admitted. I'm not ready to stop hiding. Not ready to believe I can be safe. Not ready to trust that this won't end in loss. Then what do we do? Marin thought of Cassia. Asking when her papa would come back. Thought of Darian's 4 years of self-imposed isolation. Thought of her own 3 years of running. Maybe being ready wasn't the point. Maybe courage was just choosing to try anyway. We start small, she said. You start by having breakfast with your daughter tomorrow. I start by telling you my real name when I'm scared. We build trust in pieces instead of demanding it all at once. And the mate bond? We acknowledge it. But we don't let it force us faster than we can handle. She took a shaky breath. I won't ask you to forget Seraphine. You don't ask me to stop being afraid. Deal? He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war in his eyes. Grief versus hope, fear versus possibility, death versus life. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Deal. And then, so carefully it made her heart ache, he pulled her into his arms. Not a passionate embrace, but something more profound. Two broken wolves choosing to hold each other up while they figured out how to heal. They stayed like that for a long time, in the dead queen's sitting room, while outside the door, palace staff whispered about miracles and second chances. Neither of them saw the shadow slip past the window. Neither noticed the figure watching from the gardens, eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Ravenna had been humiliated before the council. She would not forget. And she had one more card to play, one that would destroy the fragile hope beginning to bloom between the king and his unexpected mate. After all, the rogues who'd massacred Ashwood Pack hadn't acted alone. They'd been hired, and their employer had very specific plans for any survivors. Plans that were about to come to fruition. The attack came 3 nights later. During the winter solstice celebration, Ironwood Palace had been transformed for the festival, the first real celebration in 4 years. Darian had insisted on it, claiming the territories needed to see their king engaging with life again. But Marin suspected it was more personal, his way of trying to be present for Cassia, who'd been bouncing with excitement for days. Do you think Papa will dance with me? The child asked as Marin fastened tiny crystals into her braided hair. Mama used to say he was a terrible dancer, but she loved it anyway. Marin's hands stilled. It was the first time Cassia had mentioned her mother without sadness, as if speaking of Seraphine was becoming less about loss and more about memory. I think your papa would love to dance with you, Marin said softly. And it was true. Over the past 3 days, she'd watched Darian slowly, painfully, begin to engage with his daughter. Breakfast together, a story before bed, small steps, but steps nonetheless. The great hall was magnificent, filled with hundreds of wolves from across the territories. Marin stayed close to Cassia's side, hyper-aware of the stares and whispers. Everyone knew about the mate bond now. Some looked approving. Others, particularly the unmated she-wolves who'd hoped to catch the king's attention, looked murderous. But it was the absence that troubled her most. Counselor Ravenna hadn't attended. For someone who'd made such dramatic accusations, her absence felt deliberate, calculated. Marin, Cassia tugged her hand. Look, Papa's here. Darien entered like winter's storm, dressed in silver and black, his presence immediately commanding every eye. But when he found Cassia in the crowd, something in his expression softened. He moved through the assembled wolves with purpose, and when he reached his daughter, he did something that made the entire hall gasp. He knelt down to her level. "Little star," he said, using Marin's nickname for her. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" Cassia's face transformed with joy so pure it brought tears to Marin's eyes. "Really, Papa? You mean it?" "I mean it." He stood, offering his hand with courtly grace. "Though I must warn you, I'm a terrible dancer." "That's what Mama always said." Cassia giggled, taking his hand. As father and daughter moved to the dance floor, Marin felt the mate bond pulse with emotion, Darien's grief mixing with tentative joy, his fear warring with love. He was trying, moon above, he was really trying. Commander Rowan appeared at her side. "He hasn't danced since Seraphine died. You did this." "He did this," Marin corrected. "I just reminded him why it mattered." Still, the court hasn't seen him smile in 4 years. Now look at him. Marin did. Darien was laughing, actually laughing, as Cassia stood on his feet, letting him guide her through the dance. Around them, other wolves began joining the celebration, as if the king's joy had broken some spell that had held the entire palace in mourning. For one perfect moment, everything felt right, felt possible. Then the windows exploded inward. Glass and winter wind tore through the hall as figures in dark leather repelled through the shattered openings. 20, 30, 40 rogues, moving with military precision. Screams erupted as the celebration turned to chaos. "Protect the king," Commander Rowan roared, shifting mid-leap into his wolf form. But the rogues weren't going for Darien. They were heading straight for Cassia. Marin didn't think. She shifted her wolf form, emerging in a flash of silver and shadow, and launched herself between the child and the nearest attacker. Her jaws closed on his throat before he could strike. Not an Omega's attack. Something stronger, faster, more lethal. She felt Darien's shock through the bond as he saw her true wolf form for the first time. Too large, too powerful, marked with patterns that spoke of mixed bloodlines and ancient heritage. Adrift in full fury was a thing of beauty and terror. But there were too many attackers. One rogue got past her guard, grabbing Cassia. The child's scream cut through Marin like a blade. She whirled, abandoning defense for pure offense, her claws raking across the rogue's back with enough force to make him drop his prize. Darien was beside her in an instant, his own wolf massive and terrifying, an alpha in full rage. Together they formed a protective circle around Cassia, teeth bared, daring anyone to get close. The rogues regrouped, and that's when Marin saw him. A wolf larger than any rogue should be, with scars that spoke of countless battles and eyes that held cruel intelligence. He shifted to human form, revealing a face she'd hoped never to see again. Kieran Blackthorn, the rogue alpha who'd led the attack on Ashwood Pack 3 years ago. "Hello, little drift," he said, his voice carrying across the chaos. "Been looking for you for a very long time." Marin's blood turned to ice. "You destroyed my pack." "On contract, yes. Nasty business, that. But you weren't supposed to survive." He smiled, showing too many teeth. "Someone paid good money to ensure the Ashwood bloodline was completely erased. Imagine my surprise when I learned you'd been hiding here, playing nanny to a king's brat." "Who hired you?" Darien's voice was lethal. His alpha power rolled through the hall, making lesser wolves drop to their knees. "Oh, I think you know." Kieran gestured, and through the shattered windows came another figure. Counselor Ravenna. She glided into the hall like she owned it, her expression serene despite the carnage. "Your Majesty, I did try to warn you about trusting unknown wolves." "You?" Darien's growl was inhuman. "You orchestrated this?" "Someone had to protect the territories from your weakness." Ravenna's gaze swept to Marin with undisguised hatred. "Did you really think I'd let a drift infiltrate the royal family? Did you think I'd stand by while you produced mongrel heirs that could challenge pure bloodlines?" The truth crashed over Marin like frozen water. "You had my pack killed because you knew I was adrift. Because you were afraid of what I represented. Not just you, dear. All drifts. We've been systematically eliminating your kind for 20 years. Can't have wolves who don't fit proper hierarchies, can we? They give lesser wolves dangerous ideas about challenging their betters. Ravenna's smile was poisonous. You were supposed to die with your pack. When Kieran reported one had escaped, I've been searching ever since. And then you conveniently appeared in Ironwood Palace, marking yourself for me. The accusations at the council, Darian realized. You weren't trying to expose her identity. You were confirming it. Exactly. I needed to be certain before I acted. And now. She nodded to Kieran. Finish what you started 3 years ago. Kill the drift. And the king's whelp too while you're at it. Can't have witnesses. Kieran's rogues advanced. Too many to fight, too coordinated to escape. Merrin felt Darian's desperation through the bond. He was calculating odds, looking for exits, trying to find any way to save his daughter even if it meant sacrificing himself. She felt his terrible love for Cassia, the depths of it finally unburied, and his absolute certainty that he would die before letting his child be harmed. But dying wouldn't save her. The rogues would just kill Cassia afterward. There was only one way. Kieran, Merrin said, her voice carrying despite her terror. You want me? Take me, and let them go. I'll come, willingly. Merrin, no, Darian started. I'm the one Ravenna hired you to kill, right? She stepped forward, leaving the protective circle. So kill me. But first, let the king and his daughter leave. You have no quarrel with them. Kieran considered this, head tilted. Why would I settle for one prize when I can have 3? Because I'm adrift. You said yourself we're dangerous, valuable. Don't you want to know what makes us different? What gives us power? She was making it up as she went, praying he'd take the bait. Kill me quick, and you learn nothing. But let them go, take me alive, and I'll tell you everything. Give you every secret about how drifts are made, how we're identified, how you can make more of us. She felt Darian's horror through the bond. He understood what she was doing, offering herself as a research subject, knowing what rogues did to prisoners. Interesting proposition. Kieran's eyes gleamed with avarice. You'd really trade yourself for them? She's lying, Ravenna snapped. Kill them all now. I'm in charge here, counselor, Kieran said mildly. And I think the drift makes a fair point. Dead specimens tell no tales, but a live one. His smile was nightmare fuel. Yes, I accept your terms. King and pup go free, you come with me. Try to fight or escape, and I'll slaughter everyone in this hall, starting with the child. Merrin, don't do this. Darian growled. Through the bond, she felt his wolf howling denial, felt his desperate need to protect her warring with his need to save his daughter. She shifted back to human form, standing naked and vulnerable before the rogues. Get Cassia out of here, keep her safe. That's all that matters. You matter. She matters more. Merrin met his eyes, pouring everything she felt through the bond. Love, acceptance, goodbye. Be the father she needs, Darian. Don't let grief win. Promise me. She saw the moment he broke, the moment he understood she was choosing to die, so his daughter could live. Tears tracked down his face, the first she'd seen from him, as he shifted back to human form and pulled her into a desperate embrace. I just found you, he whispered against her hair. I can't lose you too. You're not losing me. You're choosing your daughter. It's what I'd want. What Seraphine would have wanted. She kissed him once, brief and bitter. Now go, before I lose my courage. Commander Rowan had already scooped up Cassia, the child screaming for both her father and Merrin. Other guards formed a protective escort. Darian stood frozen, every instinct warring with the terrible choice before him. Go, Merrin said again. Please. He went, turned and ran after his daughter, the sound of his anguished howl echoing through the palace, as he chose life over love, survival over sacrifice. Kieran's claws wrapped around Merrin's throat. Brave little drift. Stupid. But brave. Let's see if you survive what comes next. As the rogues dragged her toward the shattered windows, the last thing Merrin saw was Ravenna's satisfied smile. The counselor had won. The drift would be eliminated, the king broken again, and the territories would return to their proper order. But what none of them saw, what even Merrin didn't realize, was that her sacrifice had awakened something. The mate bond, pushed to its absolute limit, had snapped, not broken, but transformed. And Darian's wolf, finally given something worth fighting for, was about to remember what it meant to be, not just a king, but a monster. The rogues had made one critical mistake. they'd threatened his family. And the wolves who raised the first kings had a saying, "Never corner an alpha who's already lost everything. He'll burn the world down just to light the way to revenge." The rogue compound was exactly as Marin expected, brutal efficiency masked as civilization. Iron cages lined the walls of a converted warehouse, each containing wolves in various states of despair. Some were prisoners. Others were broken things that had once been whole, their eyes empty of everything but pain. Kieran threw Marin into the largest cage with casual violence. "Welcome to your new home. Drift, get comfortable. We have so many experiments planned for you." She hit the stone floor hard, her human form bruising easily without her wolf's protection, but she didn't shift. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fight. Not yet. Through the mate bond, she could feel Darian a constant presence of rage and grief, held in check only by the knowledge that Cassia needed him stable. The bond hadn't broken when they separated. If anything, it had intensified, as if the crisis had fused them together at some fundamental level. Asterisk, I'm coming for you. Asterisk. His voice whispered through the connection. Asterisk, I will burn down every rogue den from here to the southern border until I find you. Asterisk. Asterisk. No, asterisk, she sent back, praying he could hear her. Asterisk. Stay with Cassia. Keep her safe. That's what matters. Asterisk. Asterisk. You both matter. Asterisk. The bond carried his anguish, his fury, his absolute refusal to accept losing another mate. But beneath it all, she felt something else, a cold, calculating rage. Darian wasn't just grieving, he was planning, and whatever he planned, it terrified her almost as much as her current situation. She's awake, someone said. Should we begin? Ravenna stepped into view, her elegant dress somehow unstained despite the warehouse's filth. Not yet. First, I want her to understand exactly what she cost me. She pulled up a chair, sitting just outside the cage like she was visiting a museum exhibit. Did you know I had a sister once? Adrift, like you. Beautiful, powerful, everything a wolf should be. The alphas competed for her favor, offering alliances and wealth. She could have had any pack, any position. Ravenna's expression twisted. But she chose to mate with an omega. Said she loved him. That classifications didn't matter. They produced children mongrels who inherited her drift nature. And do you know what happened? Those children began questioning hierarchy. Why should alphas rule? Why couldn't drifts lead? Why should omegas submit? They were executed, Marin guessed quietly. Your sister and her family. By our own father, to preserve order. And I learned an essential truth. Drifts are chaos incarnate. You break hierarchy just by existing. So yes, I've spent 20 years eliminating your kind, and I'll spend 20 more if necessary. Ravenna leaned closer. You should have died with your pack, Marin Ashwood. Now you'll die here, alone, after we learn everything that makes drifts different. And then we'll use that knowledge to identify the others hiding in various packs, and eliminate them too. Darian will come for me. Let him try. I've already sent word to the council that you and the rogues were working together, that the attack was coordinated to kidnap the king's daughter for ransom. Darian looks like a fool who trusted the wrong wolf, his judgment compromised by a convenient mate bond. Ravenna smiled. When he arrives here on his desperate rescue mission, my forces will be waiting. And after the rogues kill him, I'll take custody of dear little Cassia and raise her properly. Perhaps even arrange a suitable match when she comes of age. The plan was elegant, evil, and completely believable. Ravenna would eliminate the drift, the besotted king, and gain control of the air. The territories would be hers to rule through Cassia. You're insane, Marin breathed. I'm pragmatic, and unlike your sister's fate or your pack's massacre, everyone will know why you died. Drifts will have nowhere left to hide. Ravenna stood. Kieran? She's yours. Just keep her alive long enough to talk. The rogue alpha entered the cage with tools that made Marin's stomach turn, but before he could begin, an explosion rocked the warehouse. The doors blasted inward, hanging from twisted hinges. Through the smoke and debris walked Darian, but not the controlled king she knew. This was the wolf beneath the crown, the monster that civilization had domesticated but never truly tamed. His eyes were pure alpha gold. His power filled the warehouse like water flooding a drowning room. And behind him came not palace guards, but something unexpected. Wolves from every classification. Betas, omegas, even a few alphas who'd apparently chosen to follow him into this suicide mission. Darian, no. Marin screamed as rogues poured from every shadow. It's a trap. I know, he said calmly, never taking his eyes off Kieran. Ravenna's forces are outside, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She thinks she's about to eliminate both problems at once. His smile was terrifying. She's right about that, just wrong about which problems. He shifted, but not fully. Like before, he held a form between human and wolf, an alpha's battle form that should have been impossible to maintain. Around him, his mismatched pack did the same, creating an army that looked like nightmares made flesh. You brought 20 wolves against my 60, Kieran laughed. Did love make you stupid, King? No. Darian's voice was layered, human and wolf speaking as one. Love made me remember what I'd forgotten. How to fight like my life meant nothing and everything simultaneously. The battle erupted with savage fury. Darian tore through rogues like they were paper, his focus absolute. But Marin could feel his energy draining through the bond. Maintaining the battle form took immense strength, and even an alpha king had limits. Commander Rowan reached her cage, breaking the lock with brute force. Can you fight? Yes. She shifted, her drift form emerging in full glory, silver fur marked with shadow, larger than an omega but smaller than an alpha, built for speed and strategy rather than raw power. Together they carved toward Darian, who'd become the center of a whirlwind of violence. He fought with the desperation of someone who'd already lost everything once and refused to experience it again. Fought with love finally unburied, channeled into protection. But Kieran was strong, and he'd been fighting his entire life. When Darian lunged, the rogue alpha was ready, his jaws closing on Darian's shoulder with bone-crushing force. Marin felt the pain through the bond, felt Darian's strength faltering. Without thinking, she launched herself at Kieran, her smaller form fast enough to target vulnerable points the larger wolves missed. She went for his eyes, his throat, his soft belly, a drift's fighting style, unexpected and devastating. Kieran released Darian to deal with her, and that moment of distraction was all the king needed. His claws found the rogue's heart, punching through ribs with alpha strength. Kieran fell, shock on his face, and the remaining rogues scattered. But they weren't safe yet. Through the warehouse doors came Ravenna's forces, 50 wolves in silver armor, led by the counselor herself. She'd been waiting for both sides to weaken each other before moving in for the kill. How touching, Ravenna called out. The broken king and his drift whore, dying together. I suppose there's poetry in that. Darian pulled Marin close, both of them bleeding, both exhausted. His remaining wolves formed a protective circle, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Any plans? Marin asked quietly. One. Through the bond, she felt his terrible resolve. There's a reason my bloodline ruled these territories for 10 generations. We carry something in our veins, something we pass only to our heirs. A gift from the first wolves, meant to be used only in the most desperate circumstances. What gift? Watch. Darian threw back his head and howled, not a normal wolf sound, but something primal that resonated in the bones of every wolf present. It was a summons, a command, an invocation of something ancient. The warehouse began to shake. From every direction came answering howls. Not from rogues or counselors, but from the wild places. From the mountains and forests and dark corners where the old wolves still lived, the ones who'd never been domesticated, never submitted to pack hierarchies, never forgot what they were before humans learned to speak. The wild hunt. The original wolves, answering the call of a bloodline descended from their chosen kings. They poured through broken windows and shattered doors, wolves of pure white and deepest black, sizes ranging from massive to impossible. They didn't attack Ravenna's forces. They simply surrounded them, golden eyes gleaming with predatory interest. And at their head came a wolf larger than any Marin had ever seen, white as snow with eyes like captured sunlight. It shifted to reveal an ancient woman, her hair silver with age, her presence radiating power that made everyone present, Alpha and Omega alike, drop into instinctive submission. Everyone except Darian, who bowed with respect rather than fear. Mother Ashara, he said quietly. I invoke the old promise. The woman's eyes swept the warehouse, taking in the battle's carnage, Ravenna's trapped forces, and finally Marin herself. Those ancient eyes widened slightly, adrift. I haven't seen one in 50 years. She moved closer, studying Marin with unnerving intensity, and mated to my descendant. Interesting. Mother Ashara, Ravenna tried, her voice shaking for the first time. This is territorial business. Is it? The ancient woman's voice could have frozen the Sunday. Then explain why I smell drift blood on your hands, counselor. Why I hear whispers of systematic elimination, of genocide disguised as maintaining order. They're dangerous, their evolution. Mother Ashara's expression hardened. Drifts are how wolf, kind adapts, changes, survives. They're the bridges between classifications, reminders that hierarchy is a tool, not a destiny, and you've been murdering them because they threaten your precious order. She turned to the wild hunt. Show them what we think of those who kill our children. The wild wolves moved as one, and Ravenna's forces didn't even try to fight. They simply dropped their weapons and submitted to the judgment of their ancestors. Your life is forfeit, Mother Ashara told Ravenna. But I'll offer you a choice. Death now, or exile to the forbidden wastes, where you'll live out your days alone, surrounded by the consequences of your hatred. Ravenna chose exile. They always did. Death was quick. Loneliness was torture. As the wild wolves escorted the broken counselor away, Mother Ashara turned back to Darian and Marin. You've made quite the mess, descendant. I had to save her, Darian said simply, even if it cost me everything. And you? The ancient eyes fixed on Marin. You offered yourself to save his daughter. Accepted torture and death to protect a child, not your own. She needed her father more than I needed to survive, Marin said quietly. Mother Ashara smiled a fierce, proud expression. This is what the old magic recognizes. Sacrifice born of love, courage in the face of impossible odds, mates who choose each other despite every reason not to. She placed one weathered hand on each of their heads. You've already passed the trials, whether you knew it or not. Now accept the blessing that comes after. Power flooded through the touch. Ancient, wild, transformative. Marin felt her drift nature stabilize, strengthen, become something she no longer had to hide or suppress. It settled into her bones like coming home, no longer a secret to be concealed, but simply part of who she was. Felt the mate bond solidify into something unbreakable, permanent as the mountains themselves. And through Darian, she felt his grief finally begin to heal. Not disappearing, but transforming into something he could carry, without being crushed. The weight of Seraphine's loss would always be there, but it no longer threatened to drag him under with every breath. When Mother Ashara withdrew her hands, they were both changed. Still themselves, but more, whole in ways they hadn't been before. Return to your palace, the ancient woman said. Your daughter needs you both, and the territories need to see that the old ways and new can coexist. She paused at the doorway. And Marin Ashwood? Stop hiding what you are. The world needs drifts now more than ever. Then she was gone, the wild hunt vanishing like they'd never been there. Darian pulled Marin close, and she felt him trembling. I thought I'd lost you. You almost did. We both almost lost everything. She looked around the warehouse at the wolves, who'd followed their king into battle, different classifications, fighting side by side. But maybe that's what it took, to lose everything to remember what actually matters. Cassia, they said simultaneously, and despite everything, they both laughed. They had a daughter waiting. And for the first time in 4 years, Darian was finally ready to be her father. The journey back to Ironwood Palace took 2 days. Darian insisted they stop frequently, not just to rest, but to truly process what had happened. The wild hunt's blessing had changed something fundamental in both of them, not their nature, but their understanding of it. I can feel you constantly now, Darian said as they camped under stars on their second night. Not just emotion through the bond, but your presence, your thoughts sometimes. I know. It's... Marin struggled for words. Like we're two halves of something that was always meant to be whole. Not completing each other, but complementing. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He pulled her against his chest, and for once, she didn't feel the ghost of Seraphine between them. The dead queen's memory was still there, but transformed, not a barrier, but a foundation. I'm not the same wolf who loved her. No, you're not. And I don't love you the same way I loved her. He tilted her face up, his amber eyes serious. What Seraphine and I had was lightning brilliant, intense, all-consuming. What we have is different. It's sunrise, steady, inevitable, warming everything it touches. Marin kissed him then, slow and sweet. A promise of futures they could build together. When they finally arrived at the palace, they found it transformed. Word had spread about the Wild Hunt's intervention, about Ravenna's exposure, about the king who'd challenged rogues and won his mate back. Wolves from across the territories had gathered, waiting to see what would happen next. But Marin only cared about one small wolf. Cassia, she breathed, seeing the child standing at the palace entrance with Mrs. Thornwell. The girl's face transformed with joy. Marin! Papa! She ran toward them, and this time, finally Darian knelt down and caught his daughter in a fierce embrace. I'm sorry, he whispered into her dark curls. I'm so sorry I've been gone. But I'm here now, little star. I'm here, and I'm not leaving again. Cassia pulled back, her golden eyes so like his own, studying his face with a child's perfect perception. You mean it? You're really back? Really back. I promise. He looked at Marin, including her in the embrace. We both are. Good. Cassia nodded with satisfaction, then asked the question that made every adult present hold their breath. Does this mean Marin can be my mama now? Silence. Darian and Marin exchanged glances, both aware of how delicate this moment was. How much it mattered. Would you want that? Marin asked gently. I could never replace your birth mother. I know, Mrs. Thornwell explained. Cassia's voice carried the simple wisdom of children. My first mama gave me life and lives in my heart, but you're here, and you love me, and you make Papa smile. So can I have two mamas, one I remember, and one I can hug? Marin's vision blurred with tears. Yes, little star, you can absolutely have two mamas. Then yes, I want you to be my mama. Cassia looked between them expectantly. Don't you have to do a ceremony or something? Kiss? That's what happens in stories. Darian laughed genuine, unguarded joy, and stood, pulling Marin up with him. She's right, we should probably make this official. Here? Now? In front of everyone? Marin gestured at the assembled crowd. Why not? We've done everything else publicly. Might as well claim you properly while we're at it. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. Marin Ashwood, last of her pack, drift between classifications, wolf who saved my daughter and reminded me how to live. Will you accept my claim? Will you be my mate, my equal, my partner in ruling these territories? Traditional claiming ceremonies were private, intimate affairs, but nothing about their relationship had been traditional. Yes, Marin said clearly. I accept your claim, Darian Stormcrest. And I offer mine in return. It was unprecedented, a drift claiming an alpha king, but after everything that had happened, no one dared object, especially when the mate bond between them flared visible to every wolf present, a silver gold light that wrapped around them like blessing. Darian kissed her then, thorough and possessive and tender all at once, while their daughter cheered and the assembled wolves howled approval. When they finally broke apart, Marin noticed something strange. Wolves in the crowd were glowing faintly, some with the same silver light she carried. More drifts, she realized. More wolves who'd been hiding their true nature, terrified of being discovered. You're safe now, she called out to them. All of you. Drifts are under royal protection. No more hiding, no more fear. One by one, they stepped forward 17 wolves of various ages and classifications, each bearing the subtle markers of drift nature. They'd been invisible their entire lives, suppressing their gifts to survive. Commander Rowan approached with a document. Your Majesty, the Council has sent word. With Ravenna's crimes exposed, they're requesting you assume emergency authority over all territorial matters. You could restructure the entire hierarchy if you wanted. Darian looked at Marin, then at the gathered drifts, then at his daughter still clinging to his hand. What if we didn't structure it at all? Not formally, anyway. Your Majesty? Classifications were meant to describe roles, not limit potential. What if we simply let wolves be what they're capable of being? Drifts as mediators, omegas as strategists, betas as leaders, whatever their talents dictate, not their birth designation. It was revolutionary. It was dangerous. It would upset centuries of tradition. Do it, Marin said softly. Give wolves the freedom your ancestor talked about. Let the territories evolve. The decree was written that night and disseminated within days. The Northern Territories would no longer enforce strict hierarchical classifications. Wolves would be judged by their abilities and choices, not their birth designation. Drifts would be protected, studied, celebrated as the evolution they represented. It didn't solve everything immediately. Change never did. But it started something, a ripple that would spread through wolf society for generations to come. 3 months later, on the spring equinox, they held a formal mating ceremony. Small and private this time, just family and close friends. Cassia served as flower girl, taking her job with adorable seriousness. Commander Rowan stood as witness, and Mrs. Thornwell cried through the entire ceremony. As Darien bound their wrists with silver cord, speaking the ancient vows, Marin felt something shift in the world around them. The mate bond settled into permanence, but more than that, the palace itself seemed to wake up, shedding years of grief like old skin. That night, in Seraphine's former sitting room that had become their shared space, Darien showed Marin something he'd been working on, a portrait. It showed Seraphine holding baby Cassia, both painted with loving detail, and beside them, skillfully added, were Darien, Marin, and Cassia, as she was now 2 families, overlapping, connected. One family, he explained, past and present, united. Marin traced the painted figures with gentle fingers. She would have liked this, liked us. I think so too. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. Thank you. For what? For being patient with a broken wolf who forgot how to live. For loving my daughter when I was too afraid to. For reminding me that surviving isn't the same as living. She turned in his embrace, pressing her forehead to his. Thank you for seeing me, for protecting me, for choosing to trust again even when everything in you screamed it was dangerous. Always, he promised. Through everything, always. And as they stood together in a dead queen's room that had become a living family sanctuary, both of them understood. Healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to carry it forward without being crushed by its weight. Outside their window, spring was transforming winter's grip on the mountains. And in the nursery down the hall, Cassia slept peacefully, dreaming of a future where she had 2 mamas to love her, one in her heart, one holding her hand. Some endings were really just beginnings, wearing different clothes. 6 months after the claiming ceremony, the Council of Territorial Alphas convened for the first time since Ravenna's exile. The atmosphere was tense. Half the council wanted to validate Darien's reforms, the other half wanted to restore traditional hierarchy. Marin stood beside Darien's throne, no longer hiding in the background. She wore silver and blue, colors that marked her as queen consort, and her drift nature was visible to all. The slight shimmer in her eyes, the way shadows bent oddly around her, the power that was neither alpha nor omega, but something entirely her own. The question before this council, Alpha Mordecai began, is whether King Darien's experiments with classification reform should be adopted territory-wide or limited to his own lands. Experiments, Darien repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Is that what we're calling equality now? Your Majesty, you must understand the concern. For centuries, hierarchy has maintained order. Alphas lead because we're strongest. Omegas submit because they're weakest. This is natural law. Mordecai gestured at Marin. But now you've elevated a drift. A classification anomaly to queen. You've allowed omegas to challenge for leadership positions. You've disrupted the entire social order. Good, Marin said, her voice carrying through the chamber. It needed disrupting. Shocked silence. Queen consorts traditionally didn't speak at council. The social order you're defending murdered my entire pack, she continued, stepping forward. It systematically eliminated drifts for 20 years because we didn't fit neatly into categories. It trapped wolves in roles they never chose, denied them opportunities based solely on birth classification. Her gaze swept the council, Tell me, alphas, is that really the natural law you want to preserve? The drift makes a fair point, said Alpha Kira, one of the few female territorial alphas. I've always questioned why my gender made me an anomaly while male alphas are considered normal. Perhaps it's time we examined our assumptions. Heresy, another council member muttered. Evolution, Darian corrected. What Queen Marin and I are proposing isn't chaos. It's simply allowing wolves to pursue roles they're suited for, regardless of classification. Alphas can still lead if they're capable. Omegas can still support if they choose. But no one is locked into a destiny, determined by birth. And the drifts? Mordecai pressed. What role do they play in your vision? Marin answered. Whatever roles they're capable of filling. Some are warriors, some are healers, some are strategists or scholars or artists. We're not a single classification with a single purpose. We're individuals, just like everyone else. But you're rare. We were rare because you killed us, she said bluntly. 17 drifts have revealed themselves in the Northern Territories since we made it safe to do so. How many more are hiding in other territories, terrified of what happens when they're discovered? The question hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, a young wolf stood in the gallery, a servant, judging by his clothes. I'm a drift, he said, voice shaking. Born in the Western Territories. I've been hiding for 8 years. Another stood. Then another. Then 5 more. Drifts who'd traveled from across the territories just for this moment, just for the chance to finally be seen without being hunted. We're not anomalies, one of them said. We're not broken or dangerous or wrong. We're just wolves who don't fit your boxes. And we're tired of being punished for it. Alpha Mordecai looked shaken. I didn't know there were so many. Because you never looked, Marin said gently. Because it was easier to maintain hierarchy than to acknowledge its flaws. The debate continued for hours. Some council members remained resistant, clinging to tradition, but others, especially the younger alphas, began to see the possibility in change. Finally, Alpha Kira stood. I propose a trial period. Each territory implements King Darian's reforms on a voluntary basis for 1 year. At the end of that period, we reconvene and assess the results. If chaos ensues, we revert. If society improves, we adopt the changes territory-wide. It was a compromise, which meant no one was completely happy. But after heated discussion, the council voted, 5 inches favor, 2 opposed, the reforms would spread. As the session ended, Mordecai approached Darian privately. You've risked everything for this, Your Majesty. Your throne, your reputation, your legacy. Why? Darian looked at Marin, then at Cassia, who'd been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. Because my daughter shouldn't grow up in a world where she's defined solely by her classification. Because my mate shouldn't have to hide her true nature to be safe. Because I've seen what happens when grief and fear make us rigid. He met Mordecai's eyes. The world changes whether we want it to or not. We can either adapt, or we can become fossils of a dead age. Later that night, back in their private quarters, Marin found Darian on the balcony, staring at the stars. Regrets? She asked, slipping her arms around his waist. None? You? Only that we can't change everything overnight. She rested her head against his shoulder. There will be resistance, wolves who refuse to accept drift, equality, who cling to traditional hierarchy. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. He turned, cupping her face. But we'll face it together. You, me, and our daughter, who's going to grow up believing she can be anything she wants to be. Our daughter, Marin repeated, savoring the words. Cassia had started calling her Mama Marin to distinguish from Mama Seraphine, and each time it made her heart ache with joy. Speaking of which, Darian's hand moved to her stomach, his touch gentle. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Marin froze. She had noticed the slight changes in her scent, the way her wolf had been protective and alert, the odd cravings, but she'd been afraid to hope, afraid to add more complexity to their already complicated situation. How long have you known? She whispered. About a week. I wanted to wait until after the council meeting to mention it. His smile was incandescent. We're going to have another pup, Marin. Our pup. She burst into tears, happy ones this time. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd lost and found again, the universe was offering them this. A family built on choice rather than obligation, love rather than duty. Cassia is going to be insufferable, she laughed through her tears. She's been asking for a baby sibling for months. Let her be insufferable. After 4 years of loneliness, she deserves all the joy we can give her. Darian pulled Marin close, his hand protective over her stomach where their child grew. All of them do. Cassia, this new pup, every wolf in our territories. They deserve a world where they're free to be themselves. As they stood together on the balcony, Marin thought about how far they'd both come. From a king too broken to love his own daughter, and adrift too afraid to be seen, to this, mates, partners, parents building a better future. I never thanked you properly, she said softly. For what? For that day in the council chamber, when you stood between me and Ravenna's accusations, when you chose to protect me, even though it would have been easier, safer, to let me face consequences alone. Marin, he tilted her face up, his amber eyes serious. I will always choose you. In every life, in every situation, through every threat and challenge. You and our family, you're what makes the crown worth wearing. She kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring everything she felt through the mate bond that connected them, gratitude, love, trust, and the fierce joy of second chances that should have been impossible. Below them, the palace had come alive again. Lights in every window, laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long, servants who smiled instead of walking on eggshells around their king's grief. They'd transformed more than just classifications. They'd transformed death into life, endings into beginnings, and proved that sometimes the most broken wolves could build the strongest foundations. Together. 5 years later, the great hall of Ironwood Palace looked nothing like it had the night of the rogue attack. Gone were the dark tapestries and cold stone aesthetic that had made it feel like a mausoleum. Instead, windows had been enlarged to let in more light, walls painted in warm colors, and children's laughter echoed through corridors that had once held only silence. Marin stood at one of those windows, watching the courtyard below where an unusual class was taking place. Wolves of every classification, Alpha, Beta, Omega, and Drift trained together under Commander Rowan's instruction. The sight would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Now it was simply Tuesday. Mama Marin, watch this. She turned to see Cassia, now 9 years old, and already showing signs of her father's alpha strength tempered by something gentler, something that reminded Marin of Seraphine's portraits. The girl was teaching her younger brother, 3-year-old Tobias, how to shift partially, a skill that required both power and control. Very good, little star, Marin praised as Cassia managed to shift just her hands while maintaining human form. Your control has improved remarkably. That's because I've been practicing with Kieran's apprentices. Cassia said it so casually, as if training with reformed rogues was perfectly normal. In their new world it was. After the battle at the warehouse, many of Kieran's rogues had chosen surrender over execution. Darian, remembering how close he'd come to becoming a monster himself, had offered them a choice: rehabilitation and service to the territories, or exile. Most had chosen service. Some were still working off their debt. A few had proven themselves enough to earn full pack membership. Your father is looking for you, Marin told her daughter. Something about a surprise? Cassia's eyes lit up. She'd transformed from a lonely, heartbroken child into a confident young wolf who knew she was loved by 3 parents: Mama Seraphine in memory, Mama Marin in daily life, and Papa who'd finally learned to show affection without fear. After she scampered off with Tobias in tow, Darian emerged from his study, documents in hand and a bemused expression on his face. What is it? Marin asked. Report from the Western Territories. Alpha Mordecai has formally requested our assistance establishing a drift identification and training program. He handed her the letter. He's also asking if you'd be willing to travel there next spring to advise. Marin read the letter, amazed. Mordecai had been one of the most resistant council members. What changed his mind? His granddaughter turned out to be a drift. Powerful one, from what he describes. She's been hiding it for years, terrified of being discovered. Darian's smile was wry. Funny how quickly opinions change when it affects you personally. It was the pattern they'd seen repeatedly over 5 years, resistance crumbling as more wolves came forward, as more families discovered their loved ones carried drift nature, as the benefits of classification flexibility became undeniable. The Northern Territories had thrived under the new system. Crime was down, productivity was up, and innovations in everything from agriculture to defense had emerged from wolves finally freed to pursue their talents rather than their assigned roles. Not everyone was happy. Some traditionalist packs in the far regions still clung to old hierarchies. There had been incidents adrift murdered in the Eastern Territories, an Omega who tried to lead their pack and was forcibly removed. Change was messy, uneven, painful. But it was happening, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. I'll go, Marin decided. If we can help even one drift feel safe enough to stop hiding, it's worth it. We'll go, Darian corrected. I'm not letting you travel without me. Not after last time. Last time had been a diplomatic visit to the Southern Territories that had turned into an attempted kidnapping by wolves who'd wanted to study drift nature through dissection. Darian had been displeased. His response had involved considerable property damage and 3 diplomatic incidents. You can't threaten to execute every wolf who looks at me wrong, Marin said, amused despite herself. Watch me. His expression was completely serious. Even 5 years into their mating, he remained absurdly protective. You're the queen consort, the mother of my children, and the wolf who saved my life in more ways than I can count. Anyone who threatens you threatens me. She kissed him, letting the mate bond carry her affection. My fierce alpha king. Your mate, he corrected. The king thing is just a job. You're my choice. Before she could respond, Cassia burst back into the room, Tobias toddling behind her. Papa, you said there was a surprise? Darian's entire expression softened that look he got around his children, the one that still, occasionally made him tear up because he'd wasted so many years afraid to feel it. There is. Come. He led them to the old portrait gallery, where paintings of past kings and queens lined the walls. At the end, he'd commissioned a new edition. It was massive, taking up nearly an entire wall. The portrait showed Seraphine holding baby Cassia, painted from the few surviving images of the late queen. But beside them, integrated seamlessly into the composition, were Darian, Marin, Cassia, as she was now, and young Tobias. 2 families, 2 timelines, 1 unified whole. At the bottom, the inscription read, The Stormcrest Legacy, built on love, strengthened by loss, united by choice. Cassia stared at it with wide eyes. Mama Seraphine looks like me. You have her smile, Marin said gently. And her kindness. She would be so proud of who you're becoming. Do you think she can see us? From wherever she is? Darian knelt down to his daughter's level. I think she sees everything, and I think she's happy that you have someone to braid your hair and read you stories and love you the way you deserve. Because Mama Marin didn't replace her, she just added more love. Cassia had clearly been thinking about this a lot. Like how Tobias didn't replace me, he just made our family bigger. Exactly right, little star. Marin pulled both children into a hug, her heart full to bursting. That evening, after the children were asleep, Darian and Marin returned to the balcony where they'd stood so many times over the years. The view never got old. Mountains painted purple by sunset, forests that stretched to the horizon, and far below, the lights of a kingdom that had learned to embrace change rather than fear it. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd made different choices? Marin asked. If I'd run that first day, if you'd rejected the mate bond. Every day, Darian's arms encircled her waist. And every day, I'm grateful we didn't. Because yes, the safe choice would have been to stay hidden, to push me away, to let grief win. But look at what we would have missed. He gestured at the palace behind them, at the home they'd built, the children they'd raised, the kingdom they'd transformed together. We didn't just survive, Marin realized. We built something better than what was broken. We built a family, Darian corrected. Not just our children, but every wolf in these territories, who now knows they can be themselves without fear. That's your legacy, Marin. Not replacing Seraphine, but finishing what she started. What she started? Seraphine always believed wolves were more than their classifications. She used to argue with the council about it constantly, said love and loyalty mattered more than birth designation. His voice grew thick with memory. She died before she could change anything, but you lived, and because you lived, her dream became reality. Marin felt tears slip down her cheeks. I wish I could have met her. In a way you have. She's in Cassia's smile, in these reforms we built, in the very foundation of what we've created. He turned her to face him. Two queens, two legacies, one vision. You didn't replace her, love. You partnered with her across time itself. As they stood together, Marin reflected on the journey, from a terrified drift hiding in a palace, to a queen who'd helped reshape wolf society. From a broken king who couldn't look at his daughter, to a father whose love had healed his entire kingdom. They'd both been ghosts once. Now they were architects of a future where no wolf would have to hide, no child would grow up ashamed of what they were, no mate would be lost to fear masquerading as tradition. Thank you, Marin whispered. For what? For seeing me. For choosing me. For being brave enough to love again even when it terrified you. Darian's kiss was answer enough. Deep, claiming, tender, and infinite with promise. Below them, the palace had fully come alive. Music drifted from the servants' quarters where wolves of every classification gathered to celebrate the week's end. In the gardens, children played without regard to whether they were alpha or omega or anything in between. And in the nursery, Cassia and Tobias slept peacefully, dreaming of a future their parents had fought to make possible. The age of hiding was over, the age of balance had truly begun. And in Ironwood Palace, where grief had once reigned absolute, love had learned to bloom again twice over, in different forms, but equally real, equally permanent, equally worth every risk, every sacrifice, every impossible choice that had led them here. Some stories ended with happily ever after. This one ended with happily ever after, again, a subtle difference that made all the difference in the world. Because second chances, they'd learned, weren't about replacing what was lost. They were about honoring it by building something new, something better, something that proved love was stronger than death, hope braver than fear, and healing possible even for the most broken wolves.